So I recently started school again, and as a part of my daily regimen, I am required to travel to Toronto, Monday to Friday, via the train and subway lines. It's about a good 2 hours one way, so I usually pull out a good book, pop in my headphones, and relax to some light music. I, of course, being from out of town, have heard a lot of the horror stories that many people endure on the TTC. Naturally, I thought most of it was just over-exaggeration and tall tales. Well, I was very quickly proven dead wrong. Rewind to a week ago, I had just finished a very long, grueling day of school, 5 a.m. to 7 p.m., and I wanted nothing more than to just relax and get home ASAP. I took my usual bus route to the subway station and sat down on one of the seats directly next to an exit door. Now a little context. I am facing forwards, looking at one seat ahead of me across the aisle of the subway car. This seat was occupied by a 20-something Asian lady who was playing some game on her phone and was paying absolutely no attention to anything going on around her. Next to the seat opposite me is another seat facing this Asian lady, and it's the person in this seat that made my 40-minute subway ride very disturbing. Occupying the seat was a lady about 30 to 40 years of age who possessed a very creepy smile. I say this because she never stopped smiling, and I mean she was smiling the entire subway ride. Anyways, the car pulled out of the station and we were on our way. For the first half of my trip, she would continuously be staring at this Asian girl, laughing and muttering to herself. She would also take her phone out of her purse and start taking pictures of this girl and whatever was on her phone. How she didn't see this, I have no clue. About halfway up the tracks, the Asian lady left the car, and this is where the attention was directed to me. She turned full front to me and just smiled at me with a huge toothy grin. I knew deep down if I made eye contact, I was gonna be in for a bad time. So I just stared at a poster on the roof of the train for what felt like hours. Eventually, she got the hint that I was avoiding her gaze like the plague and went to plan B. She opened her purse and removed a tube of toothpaste and proceeded to ingest roughly half the tube. I damn near threw up then and there, but somehow held it together, even though she was still staring and laughing at me covered in toothpaste. My stop came and I bolted from that car as fast as I could. I got to the escalator and glanced back, and guess who I see fast walking after me, arms at her side, still smiling. I was practically shitting my pants terrified by this point. I ran out of that station right to the bus. Just as it was pulling out of the station, I took one final look back, and there she was, standing on the platform, head cocked to one side, laughing and waving by. So in short, that's the story of how I lost 5 pounds of sweat and ran faster than Usain Bolt. Here's some background information before I launch into the story. At the time of this encounter, I was 16 and participating in an exchange program. My high school in America was partnered with a high school in Germany. I have been learning German since kindergarten, and every year, about 10 or so kids from the German program at my high school get to go and live in Germany with the host family for a summer. My exchange partner, Vanessa, and I got along great. As it turned out, my best friend Rebecca was on the exchange with me, and her exchange partner, Anne Catherine, was best friends with Vanessa. Needless to say, the four of us were practically inseparable. One day, we decided to head into Nuremberg to do some shopping. Vanessa and Anne Catherine lived on the same street, so the four of us walked to the little subway train station by their house. They lived about 10 minutes outside the city, so the subway train ride wasn't long at all. As we were taking the escalator down to catch the subway, we hear someone whistling at us. Thinking it would be some dumb boy messing around, we look around to see who it was. We hear the whistling sound again and lock eyes with the man riding up the escalator. We were on the down one, so we locked eyes right as we passed each other. The man was probably in his late 50s or early 60s, and he was huge. I would guess around 6'7" in height, and easily close to 300 pounds. Stupidly, the four of us wave at him. We were just messing around and didn't think the guy would think anything of it. Much to our dismay, he took it as an invitation to begin terrorizing us. Suddenly, he starts sprinting up the escalator, and once he gets to the top, gets on the down escalator and starts shoving people out of the way to get to us. For a big guy, this dude was moving fast. It was apparent that he wanted to get to us, though the people surrounding us probably thought he had left something on a train and wanted to get it before it was too late. At this point, we were basically at the bottom, so we take off running, and by the grace of God, the train we needed had already pulled up. We run onto the train and sit down, relieved that we got away from this scary guy, or so we thought. The train we were on was separated into sections, so there were see-through doors you had to go through if you wanted to get to a different section, if that makes sense. About a minute into our subway ride, we see the guy moving through the section in front of ours. We immediately stand up and sprint to the next section, hoping that we'll find a more crowded one that we can hide in. This continues on for a few more minutes, until we realize that we've reached the front of the train. We sit down in the 4 seats closest to the front, and sure enough, the man comes barging into our section. He sits in a single seat across from us and positions himself so he has a clear view of us. Then he starts laughing, really deep and slow. We were trying so hard not to look at him, but out of the corner of my eye, I could see that his eyes were unblinking and bulging out of his head. He was grinning in such a malicious way, and he started to drool. He even licked his lips a few times. We start whispering in English to each other, hoping that this guy's English isn't that strong, and we decide that at our stop, we're going to sprint off the train and find a policeman or someone who can help us. The train gets to our stop, and we bolt off of the train. Luckily, our stop is pretty crowded, so we're hoping to duck out of sight and then find someone who will help us. We turn around to make sure he isn't behind us and the guy hasn't got off the train, but he's shifted so he has a clear view of us from the window by his seat. We watch for a little and the train begins to pull away, but not before the man widens his smile and begins slowly waving at us. I swear he didn't break eye contact or stop waving until the train was entirely out of sight. I don't really know what that guy wanted with us, or why he was so hell-bent on chasing us through the train. Maybe he was planning on getting off at our stop with us, but when he saw how crowded it was, decided to just stay on the train. All I know is that I was absolutely scared shitless. I live in Massachusetts, about an hour's drive outside of Boston. Because of certain health concerns, I frequently take the train into Boston and the subway to my doctor's office, rather than visiting a local doctor's office in my hometown. You run into quite a few strange occurrences on the underground, but this one is outright the scariest I've ever experienced. I had taken the T all the way into the city and waited for the subway train to come. For some reason, the C-rail on the Green Line was taking a really long time to come, and I wound up being late for my doctor's appointment, and I had to reschedule. Pissed, I just got lunch and went back to the subway. Once I was back in the underground, I was still not able to even think straight. I mistakenly got on the train to the government center and had to get off and switch trains. I suppose this encounter was inevitable, but maybe if I hadn't made the mistake of getting on the wrong train, this whole experience never would have happened. I don't even know. So, When I got on the right train to the North Station, I immediately sat down and started playing with my phone like I usually do, avoiding eye contact and any potential trouble as best I could. When you're a young lady taking any sort of subway train, you're gonna get looks, you're gonna get checked out, you might even get pressed up against or hovered over. As uncomfortable as that can be, it's really unavoidable with some of these guys, and you begrudgingly have to just get used to it. However, what I didn't expect was to see a far older gentleman point blank staring at me the entire way from the government center to the North Station. A whole 2 stations apart. Even most of the creeps have more tact than that. And it was especially weird because when I say gentleman, this guy was decked out. His hair looked immaculately straightened. It was long and pulled back in a sleek, silvery ponytail. He wore what looked like gold-rimmed glasses. He was wearing a sweater vest over a blue cotton shirt, a khaki knee-length trench coat, and carried a cane-handle umbrella. Not the typical sort of guy that would creep on you. I mean, he looked like a college professor, but he sure didn't act like one. I tried to just brush it off, although I couldn't help but shoot him a couple glances just to see if he was still looking at me. Each time I looked up, I saw that he still was, and he would raise his eyebrows, or wink at me, or just smile wider. He was really freaking me out. When we got to the North Station, I couldn't get off the train fast enough. I rudely pushed away as many people as I could and sprinted up the stairs, just trying to put distance and a greater obstacle of crowd between us. As I exited the subway, I saw to my relief that a crowd of people was already being permitted to cross over to the North Station by a traffic cop. I lost myself in the crowd and bustled quickly over to the station, but when I reached the front door and turned around to hold the door out to whoever was behind me, I almost choked. He was directly behind me, and it struck me that he had to have pushed through the crowd just to keep on my tail. I felt an adrenaline rush coursing through my body, and the world spun around me. I was just terrified that this was even happening. I ran ahead and pushed through the second line of doors and into the station at large. I wound my way through the crowd and went to look at the schedules to see when my train would be coming. I felt every muscle in my body tense as the guy came up to me to start a conversation. I didn't even get a hello or how are you. He dove straight in asking, "So, where are you headed?" "Home," I answered curtly. "Where's that?" he pushed. I should not have said this, but I told him my hometown. "Ah," he nodded knowingly. "That's the Newburyport line." "Yup," I said, trying to convey that I knew what I was doing, and I didn't need his help. I was starting to notice people around us taking notice of our conversation. I probably looked visibly uncomfortable, and I even saw a few guys nearby tense up, in case they were going to have to step in for me. "The ticket counter is just over there," he said, motioning to the other side of the partition that separated the main part of the station from the back walkway. "I already have my ticket," I informed him, trying to sound polite, and yet hinting yet again that I didn't need his help. "Yes, the ticket counter is right over there," he said again. I scrunched up my brow in confusion. He wasn't even standing a foot away from me. I really doubt that he hadn't heard me, but I repeated myself anyway. "I already have my ticket." "Yes, well, the tickets at the counter are only $3, he informed me. "That's good to know," I said. Knowing this was a bold-faced lie, but I got a round trip on my way here. "Yes, but the tickets at the counter are only $3. Getting fed up, I finally just snapped. "Alright, I'm going to go get Dunkin' Donuts. It was nice talking to you," and I promptly walked away. I think the guy finally became aware that the people surrounding us had been staring at us the whole time, catching the whole conversation. He looked embarrassed as he walked off to who knows where. I breathed a sigh of relief, thinking I was finally rid of him. After getting my coffee, I went to sit on a bench near the platform entrances and did my best to look like I was minding my own business. But then here comes the weird guy again. He walks past straight in front of me, staring at me the entire time he passes until I look back up at him. Then he pretends to be looking at the schedules and disappears into the crowd. He repeats this 3 times until he notices that he's getting weird looks, not just from me, but from people all around us. Then he settles on going and standing somewhere off in the distance, but still within line of sight of me. I cringe inwardly and shake my foot nervously, waiting for my train to be called. When my train finally does arrive in the station, I book it for the furthest car at the front of the train. After entering and finding a seat, I anxiously keep my eyes on the entrance, worrying about whether he's followed me again, waiting to freak out and alert a conductor as soon as I see his face appear in the doorway, but it doesn't happen. I breathe a sigh of relief and settle into my seat to enjoy my ride home, trying to slow my escalating heartbeat and convince myself that I will never have to see the man again. But lo and behold, when the train finally pulls into the station at my hometown and I step off into the platform, I look to my left down the line of carriages, and he stepped off too. As soon as he sees me gaping at him, a creepy smile stretches across his face and he starts walking quickly towards me as if we were old friends. You can't make this stuff up. I still needed to pay for my parking ticket, and at my station, there's 2 terminals for paying. One is right on the platform on the first floor, and the other is on the second floor. I sprint away from the man, almost slamming into a couple, and bolt for the elevators. I press the button, and thank gosh, one of them is right there to receive me. I hurry in and turn around, seeing the man still pushing through the crowd in the distance. His eyes locked on me. I punched the button for the 5th floor over and over and then hit the closed door button, not wanting him to see what floor I was really going to stop on. Lucky for me, there didn't seem to be anyone else who wanted to get on the elevators for some reason. My car was on the 1st floor, but I had to shake this man first. I don't know exactly where he was, but as the elevator was reaching the 2nd floor, I hit the button for the 3rd floor. The elevator stopped there. I hopped out of the elevator and turned around to see the 2nd elevator shooting up toward the 5th floor with the guy inside. We locked eyes as he went up, and it looked like he was ready to murder someone when he saw me. I couldn't even move for a second or two. I was so terrified. I couldn't get down the stairs fast enough. I paid for my parking ticket on the 2nd floor and then ran down to the 1st floor to my car. I made it to my car and drove to the exit gate, ran my ticket through the scanner, and drove away as fast as I could. To this day, telling that story to friends or family gets me very worked up and can trigger an anxiety attack. I never saw that guy ever again, and nor do I want to. I don't know what that guy wanted, what he was going to do if he caught me, or what he was going to do if I had left the main part of the station that day and walked with him to the ticket counter. I really feel for any other women he's literally stalked to the point of following them to their hometown, or worse. I've lived in a big city all my life. I've been riding public transportation alone since I was 15. I have my angry, don't mess with me subway face down packed and consider myself pretty savvy. All that being said, I've never been so scared on the subway in my life. One night, my significant other and I were headed home from dinner and a movie. We had to transfer trains and blended into the crowd, leaving one train and headed up a path to another. I inadvertently cut this guy off when walking up the stairs. I turned, apologized quickly, and kept moving. We took a roundabout path to our connecting train, and I babbled on all the while. When we boarded our final train, I noticed my significant other was glancing around with a very uncomfortable look on his face. He grabbed my arm and said we had to change train cars. I shrugged and obliged, still babbling. A few stops later, my significant other wanted to change cars again. I started getting nervous and asked what was up. The guy that I cut off 2 train transfers ago was on the same train as us. I told my significant other he was paranoid. Even so, we changed train cars a random number of times. Each time, the guy mirrored our moves. I took a chance and glanced back to see the guy staring dead at me with a creepy smile on his face. He was big and unkempt and intimidating. Now, I'm genuinely terrified. We approached our train stop and hesitated. We didn't want this guy to know which stop was ours, so my significant other pulled me off the train right before the doors closed. The guy followed. We jumped back on the train quickly. The guy followed. My significant other pulled me off one last time, and the doors immediately closed, trapping the creeper on the train. I stood on the platform breathing hard with my arms around my significant other, and the guy banged on the train window with that creepy smile on his face as the train pulled out of our station. We walked home in the dark with our arms around each other and constantly looking around. I didn't take that path home for a few weeks. If my significant other wasn't with me, I would have never noticed I was being followed. Now I always look around when I'm traveling on public transit, just to be sure. I was never an avid commuter until I got into college, but it didn't take long for me to realize that loonies love to ride the train. It was about 11 p.m. and I was heading back from hanging out with some of my college friends. Now, I don't live in Toronto, my school is just there. For those that don't know, from my hometown, it takes about half an hour for me to get to the bus terminal that has a bus going to my area. So I spent quite a lot of time sitting on the train. It was a weekday, so there weren't that many people still around, which was good because I preferred it not being packed. But unfortunately, this was the prime time for the loonies I mentioned earlier. When the train came and I found myself a comfortable spot, there was only about 5 other people in the cabin, or whatever one segment of the train is called. Everyone seemed perfectly fine except for this tall, white, lanky dude who was standing right up against the doors, muttering something to himself. He had messy brown hair, his teeth were disgusting, and his eyes were bloodshot. It doesn't take a genius to figure out he was probably a bit less sane than the others. At first, I just decided to mind my own business, plugging in both my earbuds and averting my gaze, but then, from the corner of my eye, I noticed he was staring at me. Needless to say, I got a bit nervous. I continued to ignore him, hoping he'd leave soon or look at someone else. So I decided to look around the cabin, only to notice that everyone else had already got off, and it was just me and him in the cabin. I was still quite a ways to go for my stop, so I decided to just let it be for now. I've seen people like him before, and usually they just mutter incoherent babble to themselves and not bother anyone. But this guy was unique. My music was still playing, and I wasn't looking at him, but then he moved and sat right in front of me, his grin exposing his rotten teeth, and his gaze, he stared at me, and this was right after a stop. I tried to ignore him further, but it was impossible, considering he was sitting right in front of me. I then noticed he began to say something. I couldn't hear and didn't really want to, but he kept saying it and started to look agitated, so I took out my earbuds. "Did you do it?" he said with a raspy voice. I had no clue what he was talking about, so I just remained silent, the ride feeling like forever now. "Did you do it?" he started to shout. Then he stood up looking very angry. Now, if this was a normal person, I'd have told them to fuck off by now, but this guy was on something. It was probably meth. And if there's anything you should know about meth users, it's that fighting them or pissing them off too much is a grave mistake. They can't feel shit. Well, anyways, the train finally stopped and I got off quickly, still about 8 stops away from my destination, and he simply stared at me as the train rode away with his haunting and bewildered gaze. Still no clue what he was on about asking me if I did it, but to be honest, I'd rather not know.